Hey guys, Brian Davis and Denny Saplia here from Spark Rental.
Hi, everyone.
Happy Tuesday. So last Tuesday, Denny interviewed attorney Saj Grubbs on how to protect your assets, especially in your golden years. As you get older and you accumulate more assets, how to protect them. I was actually on vacation in Montana last week doing some hiking. Uh, this week, we are diving into rent default insurance, how it works, how it protects your rents, and we will also go over a couple other ways to protect both your rents and yourself as a landlord, protect some of your liability. So as you guys join us, let us know where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear that. And of course, fire your questions at us. This is a live interactive podcast, and it is just as much about you and your questions as it is about Denny and me up here talking at each other. So this is a particularly timely issue, rent default insurance and rent defaults, because over the last 15 months there have been record rent defaults in the U.S. and landlords have not been able to actually evict and enforce their leases because of the eviction moratorium, which the Biden administration announced within the last week or so that they were extending one more month through the end of July, although they insist that this time is the last time, despite it having been extended, three times now, four times now? It's been
I
extended
know.
repeatedly.
It's like one more time, one
Yeah,
more time.
exactly. And this is a big problem for mom and pop landlords who still have to make their mortgage payments. They are not protected under the foreclosure moratorium because they are not homeowners and they are in business as property owners. So they still have to make their monthly mortgage payments, but many of them have not collected rents in 15 months. So even before the pandemic, the risk of losing rental income was still a massive risk as the landlord business model. So, Denny, let's talk about how rent default insurance works, how it protects you, why you should consider it, and let's just start off with what is a blanket definition, broad-based definition here. What is rent default insurance?
Well, basically, when a tenant's in default, which means he's broken the lease, or she has broken the lease, and owes money or damages or whatnot, you can get an insurance, which is amazing because I've been in this business since way back, and we had nothing like this. So I think it's amazing. But it protects you in case they don't pay their rent. So it provides you income regardless. And a lot of people don't go, they don't invest because that's one of their fears. So this
Right.
alleviates one of those fears. So
Right. So to put it in one sentence or less, I guess there's no such thing as less than one sentence in a statement. But uh, if the tenant stops paying the rent, the insurance kicks in and starts writing you monthly rent checks until you have replaced that tenant with a new paying tenant, or of course
absolutely.
until the tenant catches up, in which case you do have to pay pay the insurance money back, the rent that you received. But if the tenant defaults and you have to evict them, then the insurance company pays you the rent until you evict them and get them out and get a new tenant in there.
Right.
By the way, Tim Dooley says, Happy Tuesday. Hope you guys had a great 4th. Tim, we hope you had a great 4th
Oh,
of July as
yeah.
well.
Happy
And
4th.
and Tara Christine says hello from Long Island, New York. Tara,
Nice.
thank you so much for joining us today. And again, guys, fire your questions at us as we talk about rent default insurance today, because it is a new concept for a lot of Americans. This is actually a very standard type of insurance overseas, in most English-speaking countries and most European countries. All landlords get rent default insurance for every property, and it's just kind of part of the business. So it takes that element of risk out of the equation when you buy a rental property or when you convert your home into a rental property. It takes that risk of your tenants stopping making rent payments, it takes that out of the equation. So, Denny, how much does this insurance cost? Because this usually the first question that landlords ask
Right.
when they're introduced to this concept of rent default insurance.
It's largely based on the rent, but on an average rent of 12 to 1500, expect to pay somewhere around 4 to 450 a year. Um, and I like to say budget it in. Brian and I talk a lot about budgeting all the costs, even if you're self-managing, budget management costs in. And if you're budgeting this in before you even purchase a property, or you're, looking at what you should rent it for, maybe throw a little extra in for this insurance, it kind of pays you're double safe, I guess is a best way to say it. I'm going to put our little handy dandy calculator in the chat that I happen to really like.
Well, of course you do. We created it.
But I always play around with it.
No, it's a great calculator. So it's a totally free rental cash flow calculator, you guys, and it includes a built-in mortgage calculator as well.
Right.
So you can run the numbers for how much you can expect in monthly cash flow, and it also includes a cap rate calculator and a whole bunch of other numbers that are, as Deni said, handy dandy. So yeah, this is just one more cost to include among your expenses when you're running your cash flow numbers. But again, $450 a year for an average rental property. We're not talking about a massive amount of money here, and especially given that it helps you sleep at night. It's one less risk.
And can you imagine, like, some of the mom and pop landlords that are hurting right now, if they had this in place already, it would be a whole different ball for them.
Yeah, I mean, landlords who have experienced rent defaults during the pandemic and have not been able to evict their tenants. If you had this insurance, you would have been collecting a rent check every month from the insurance company. So, this is one of those policies, like most insurance, that you don't think you need it until you do, and then you really need it. So, but once you know you need it, it's too late if you don't have it. So,
right.
And by the way, that cost is tax deductible, so you can write that off with your taxes each year. So, which takes some of the effective cost out of it,
right,
if you're not having to pay taxes on it. So
that's even better.
Yeah. So, Deni, how widespread is this? Like, are there a lot of companies in the U.S. that offer this? Where can people buy and learn more about rent default insurance if they're interested?
Well, there was a lot. I think the pandemic took a few out, unfortunately. But I don't think there's one big one that we work with, named Steady, and I'll put that link in too. But there used to be quite a few more, but I don't know, to be honest with you, if the other ones are still operating, Brian.
Yeah, so Steady is still operating. The other big one that we used to work with was Rent Rescue, and they were forced to suspend writing new policies during the pandemic. They still honored their existing policies, but they suspended writing new policies during the pandemic because they didn't know how long the eviction moratorium would be in place, and didn't want to be on the hook for 16 months of rent payments.
Right.
When landlords can't get these erstwhile tenants out of their properties. So whether they will resume writing new policies come August 1st, I don't know. We should actually reach out to them because we used to have a relationship with them. But we haven't talked to them in a year and a half since the pandemic started.
Unfortunately.
But Steady is still writing policies. So Deni put a link to them in the chat. And Deni, let's walk through the mechanics of exactly how a claim works. Have you ever filed a claim with Steady or one of these other companies?
No, I've been pretty lucky, Brian. But from what I hear, it's not very hard. I mean, you basically are going to open the claim. So it's like opening an insurance claim. You're going to have to show them paperwork that you're not getting paid or how much you're getting paid. And I believe that, have you, Brian, because it's been a while. So I think that you have to put in that your tenants have to have a certain amount of credit. They have to be a decent renter. So you can't go in and get, a tenant who has 200 credit score and hasn't worked for 5 years and throw them in there and then put in a claim. So they're going to protect themselves.
So I have filed a claim. It's been a couple years. But yeah, you do have to provide the insurance company with your tenant screening reports. Because they're not going to accept just anybody. I mean, they don't want you to just take someone off the street who's willing to sign a lease for an absurdly high rent,
right,
even though they're nowhere near qualified to actually afford that rent. But their standards are pretty low. I mean, their minimum credit score is I think it's in the 500s. I mean, it's really low. So, as long as you screened these tenants, um, you're probably not going to have a problem. And their study is very transparent about their minimum requirements for for income. There's a minimum rent to income ratio, which again is pretty generous. I think it's a minimum ratio of like 1 to 3.
Right. And you know this up front. So when you're screening your tenants, you already have this criteria. So it's just something else that you can use to go by.
Yeah. Um, and then you provide them with a copy of the lease, and this is all when you open the policy, which, by the way, you renew the policy each year as you sign a new lease. Whether you're renewing a lease with an existing tenant or signing a new lease with a new tenant. So you provide the tenant screening reports and the lease agreements when you buy a policy or renew your policy, and then when you file a claim, I think it's a 2-minute online process. From what I
Yeah.
remember, you go online. There's a couple of questions you have to fill out. You confirm any late fees that are due, any utilities, back utility payments that are due to you, and that's really it. And you set you enter the dates, of course, when the default started. And then as you go through the eviction process, you do have to keep the insurance company updated,
Right.
and send them a copy of the judge's decision at the eviction hearing, and that sort of stuff. But it's minimal kind of
There
stuff. We're
also
not
might,
talking about a lot of paperwork.
I think there is a waiting period before you get your first payment. Isn't it like 2 weeks or?
Well, right. It's not like they're going to overnight you the rent check
Right.
the minute that you submit your claim. But it's not long. It's a week or two. Within a couple of weeks, you'll have the rent check, and then they'll keep paying it every month until you have a new tenant in there who's paying. So it's pretty easy. It's easier than you would think.
And it keeps your rent steady.
Yeah, but I'm ching. All right, so that's one type of insurance. Now, a lot of people get confused because there are several other types of insurance that landlords deal with. One of them being rental property insurance, which is also known as landlord insurance. And Deni, tell us about what that is, and just clarify how that's different from rent default insurance.
Well, that's not really protecting your rents per se, but it's protecting any liabilities against the landlord for slip and falls or any of that kind of thing, fires, damages, anything that has to do with the building, usually itself, or people hurting themselves and that kind of thing. Most mortgage companies will require it.
Right.
And if you own the property outright,
You
yeah,
should still
I
have
wouldn't.
property insurance.
Exactly.
But
And
yeah, so
you know what? I can tell you just a real quick story of somebody that didn't. And there
oh
was
no,
snow. It was in Philly. There was snow, and a man slipped and falled, and the person who I was managing for had to pay big bucks out of
really?
pocket. Yep.
Oh, so that wasn't even a property damage thing. That was a liability.
Yes.
Huh.
Yes. So.
So yeah, I mean, I've had properties catch fire, and I've had massive storm damage. And so just like you need homeowners insurance to protect your home in case of damage to your home, you need landlord insurance to protect your building, your rental property. Now, one big difference is that rental property insurance does not cover the tenant's belongings inside the property
Mm-mm.
the way that homeowners insurance does cover your personal belongings. Um, like Deni said, rental property insurance covers the building itself, and it usually offers some liability protection for you as the landlord. Now, renters should get their own renter's insurance, which does cover their personal belongings
Yes.
against losses, against theft, against damage. If the building burns down due to an electrical issue, that covers the renter's belongings. And renter's insurance can provide the landlord with a little bit of liability protection as well. For example, if your tenant's dog attacks a neighbor, the neighbor can go after the tenant knowing that they have insurance that will foot the bill. If the tenant doesn't have insurance, they might go after you knowing that you have more assets than the tenant does. So there is some
And
liability protection there.
you gotta be really careful with the dog thing too, because if you're a landlord who allows a dog in that's against, on those lists that they have, and then it could be that you are, yeah, you might even be footing the bill.
Right. Now, by the way, we did add a link in the comments here to a partner of ours, a company called Shore, that does offer very competitive rental property insurance policies. And they do offer renters insurance policies as well. Not that you will be buying that, but landlords should be requiring their tenants to buy renters insurance coverage and should provide the landlord with proof of coverage when they sign a lease agreement.
Yes.
And the other way that renters insurance protects you as a landlord is if there's a problem at your property and it becomes uninhabitable temporarily, the renters insurance will usually house the tenants. They'll put them up in a temporary accommodation. And that means you don't have to pay for that, whereas you might have to pay for that based on your state's laws. If the property becomes uninhabitable and the tenant's on a
Right.
lease, you might be footing the bill for that tenant in like a hotel room or somewhere else, and those bills add up really fast. So,
And having the tenant making the tenant get this type of insurance to me is priceless, because I can't tell you how many times over the years, a roof has leaked and ruined a sofa or something like that, and the tenant immediately says, "What are you going to do? Are you going to replace this?" And it's
right.
nice to know that I have, clause in my lease saying, "No, you were supposed to have this."
Yeah, they have someone else to go hassle for the money rather
Right.
than you. Now, there are a couple other things you can do as a landlord to protect against rent defaults beyond just buying rent default insurance. So, Deni, what else should landlords be doing, real quick here, to protect themselves against rent defaults?
Definitely screen, obviously. I mean, we talk about that all the time. Um, you want to make sure not only that their credit is good, but check out how long they've been at their place of employment, because especially nowadays, that's important. Um, and another thing is that I'm finding out is real important is check their bank statements. You can ask in most states, and make sure they have a cushion so that if something happens like this pandemic, that you're not going to be, the one suffering along. Yeah, it's just one less thing you have to worry about, because you have a responsible renter who has
An emergency fund.
savings.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, And if you do want to buy rent default insurance, you need to run those tenant screening reports anyway.
Right.
So,
That's true.
these all work hand in hand to protect you and to protect your rental income. And then, Deni, people also need to sign a lease, right? So,
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
yeah, and we talk quite a bit about a lot of the clauses that need to be included in a lease if you actually want to get real protection out of it. But yeah, so Deni, give them a few quick thoughts on what do people need to know about a lease to make sure they're protected.
Well, I mean, I had said it before earlier that if you have in your lease that you require or you strongly suggest that they have renter's insurance, and if they don't, you are not responsible for their personal belongings. That's a protection against you in case something like this happens,
Absolutely.
so you don't have to worry about it. So a lease helps with that. With eviction and whatnot, especially everything that's going on right now. If you're in a state, Pennsylvania is one of them, where you can get a waiver of notice. So then you can just go right to court without having to send the official notice. So as soon as they lift this ban, you can just rush to the courthouse. You don't have to send notice at
Before the
this
backlog.
point. Yeah. That's also helpful. And you got to check your state. Not all states allow you to do it, but it definitely get you to court quicker. And then you want to make sure that you can collect attorney and court fees and back rent. All that should be spelled out in your lease, because one of these days you'll be able to get to court and get this money from them.
And
And
hopefully in
yeah,
August. And by the way,
yeah.
we'll be doing an entire episode about the end of the eviction moratorium at the end of this month, at the end of July. We were joking earlier, but we actually do believe the Biden administration when they say that this was the last time that they're extending this eviction moratorium. So we're going to sit down and we're going to talk through all of the implications of the end of the eviction moratorium and what landlords need to be prepared for before August 1st. So
Absolutely.
yeah, the last Tuesday in July, sit down with us and we're going to talk through that. and all of the implications of that. Deni, anything else that you want to go over regarding rent default insurance or any other types of insurance that landlords should be having to protect themselves?
Just to make sure. I mean, check your policies as well, on your, the property insurance, landlord insurance, whatever you want to call it. Look through your policies. Don't assume anything, because you don't want to have that surprise when somebody tells you, "Oh no, that's not covered." So
Right.
check your policies.
All right, guys. Well, let us know what you want to hear about in the coming weeks. We are here for you. And on that note, happy Tuesday. Have a great week. We will see you next Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific. Have a good one.
Have a great day.